What's up, Auburn? Pastor Crespo here, once again with Pastor Dustin Hall of the Try Jesus Auburn podcast. My friends, this episode is for the skeptic. If you're one of these people that always has something to say about why you don't believe in Christianity, this episode is just for you. We're in the quote unquote Easter season, and while everybody's sitting there worrying about dyeing their eggs, hiding all their candies for their kids to hunt for them, there's something that happens during this time of year that, we don't want to let it pass without taking the time to mention it. So if you're a skeptic, if you've ever asked a question, well, how do I know that Jesus is real? We're celebrating the resurrection. What is that about? You want to sit tight for this one. Now, before we go into that, we want to talk about the website, tryjesusauburn.com. Get in touch with us there. Like, share, subscribe to this program. And hey, I think, Pastor Dustin, we need to invite our listeners. If you're a regular to the podcast, I have a question for you. Why don't you become a digital missionary? What does that mean? Well, take the link for this episode and put it on your own social media. Put it on your Facebook feed. How about copy the link and email it to your friends, especially the skeptics. What's happening? How you doing? This episode is for you. What are we talking about today, Dustin?
We're going to look at reasons to believe that the resurrection actually happened.
Okay.
It's Easter season. It's sometimes for some reason Christmas seems to take the biggest holiday in Christianity, but it should be this time of year.
Right.
Number one, because this time of the year is actually the time of year when Jesus rose, for one thing. It's probably closer to the date than Christmas is.
That's right.
And two, if the resurrection didn't happen, there's no point to Christianity.
None of this matters.
None of it matters. None of what we preach, none of what we teach matters. So
that's right.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about and give people reasons why we can trust that it's true, or at least consider it.
And I would say again, for the skeptic, think about this for 1 minute, right? Well, let me back up. I had a friend who when I was living in New Hampshire, he had this tremendous New England accent, and park the car in the yard, that type of accent. But he said to me, I don't know why you believe in God. I don't believe in God. And I said to him, and this is what I say to the skeptic, look, if God is not real, but I choose to live by these beliefs of being nice and loving people, I haven't lost anything. But if God is real and you've chosen to live opposite of what he asks us to live, at the end of all this, you're going to have a very big problem. So at least, I said to him, at least take the time to examine the claims of Christianity. So this is what you're taking us through. We want to examine some of these things. You want to give us proof for the resurrection. Oh, skeptic, my friend, listen up. This is for you.
Yep. So one of the reasons, and this is going to assume some things, we don't have time to go through the veracity of the New Testament and how it's, likely a reliable historical record, at least for the people and some of the events. That's in other episodes of our podcast. So we're going to take the idea that the New Testament is at least a reliable historical document. Now, whether you believe the fantastical things about Jesus in it or not, that's a whole different discussion. But for this conversation, you at least have to say, okay, let's consider that, and historians do, by the way. There are extra biblical accounts that Jesus of Nazareth did exist. There was a big movement surrounding his life. He was crucified. So those events are fairly widely accepted by historians. So it's hard to debate that.
Jesus is a historical figure.
He is, yes. And we have episodes on that. And so we need to examine this claim that says, did he actually rise from the grave?
Right.
Did he rise from the dead? So the first thing that I think we need to consider is that all four Gospels claim that he did. And so Luke was not even a follower of Jesus at the time, and he did research based on his followers and from his followers, eyewitnesses. They claim it. And even when they go over to the Holy Land and they look at the potential graves of Jesus, those are empty. No one's ever found the remains of Jesus. He was a historical figure. He really was crucified. No one's ever found his grave. No one's ever found a body that say, here lies Jesus.
Right.
And with such a great following, they would have found that.
Yeah.
They would have found that.
They would have made that gravesite a a place of worship.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, there's the Shroud of Turin and all that. Maybe that's a future episode that we talk about.
Mhm.
But all 4 Gospels report that the tomb was empty. So that's one thing to go on.
Mhm.
Not one of those followers, and they haven't even found anything that said, no, he didn't really rise. All reports or accounts report that he did.
Right.
Here's the next thing. People say, oh, he didn't really rise. His tomb is empty because the soldiers fell asleep and people stole his body.
Right.
That's why the tomb is empty. Well, if you know anything about Roman history, those Roman soldiers would have been tortured and killed
Mhm.
if they fell asleep on duty. And especially if the body of someone is as significant as Jesus,
Right.
his body had been stolen. So the Roman soldiers were highly trained, highly respected throughout the world. These guys didn't fall asleep on duty.
Right.
There is no way. And if you know anything about the graves over there, they were these massive stones that they would push in place, and there was usually a groove cut out in front of the tombs,
Right.
and the stone would actually slam down. So it would have taken somebody massively.
It wouldn't have been a quiet process.
No, it wouldn't have been a quiet process. You needed more than one person to push this thing out of the way,
Right.
get in there, steal the body, all with these Roman soldiers sleeping.
Yeah.
Boy, I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, and I think so. You're putting together some pieces here. I wouldn't hang up on one because someone might say, "Well, yeah, okay, that there might be a possible explanation for one thing." This is the first piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Right.
These are just things to consider. We're not trying to force it down your throat or say you have to believe this, but just consider some of this evidence and see if anything resonates with you.
Yeah.
The next thing, and this speaks to the Gospels themselves, we have this verse, Mark 16, 1-6. This is really fascinating. So it says, when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb, and they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone? So according to them, they're expecting the stone to be there, and they're not strong enough to push it away. Looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled back. So as this story continues, Mary Magdalene is the first one to report or to see the risen Savior. And Mark says that he writes it in his book that she was the first eyewitness.
Yeah.
Now, on the surface, most people would say, what's the big deal with that?
Right.
Well, here's the big deal. In those days, women could not be witnesses of crimes or anything else. Women did not have the same place in society as they have now. This was a Jewish woman who there was a connection with that also. She potentially was even at one point in her life a prostitute. So if you are making this up,
it's not a good witness. Not a very credible.
Right. You would have a respected government official, at least a man,
right?
A religious teacher, somebody to be the first eyewitness to the resurrection of Jesus. You wouldn't have a potentially disgraced woman or a woman at all be the eyewitness.
Right. Yeah.
And this is what the Gospels report, that it was a woman.
Right.
That would be ridiculous. And people would write it off right there unless it was actually historically accurate.
Right.
That's another big piece. The other part is that
what does it say? What does it say that so men in that time and probably today place a certain value on a woman to be a credible witness, but when Jesus was resurrected, he could have said, well, no, I'm not going to reveal myself to her.
Yeah.
Let me wait for a guy to come around the corner. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what does then, for you women out there, women skeptics, we're hitting everybody today. For you female skeptics, what do you think it meant for Jesus to say, I'm going to show myself to her?
Well, it's a whole nother episode. Maybe we should talk about it, bring our wives in to talk about it. But the idea that the Bible, that God is vindictive or hateful toward women, you're not reading the Bible right.
Yeah.
Because from the very beginning, the story of Hagar, Ishmael's mother with Abraham, God is loving and cares for her. It's from the very beginning.
Yeah.
He is merciful and kind and reaches out despite what the culture is doing and how the culture is treating women. God is merciful and kind to women all throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
So if you've heard that lie that God hates women or oppresses women, you're not reading the Bible and you're not reading it the right way.
Right. Right.
And this is another example. This is another example.
Absolutely. I just thought I'd throw that in there because I just find it interesting.
Yep.
Jesus is not worried about that kind of stuff.
Another thing that is included in the Gospels is that it has specific details about things that you wouldn't think would even matter. It mentions that his grave clothes, or the cloths that they laid over him, after they were folded.
Yeah.
Like there's specific, minute details that,
right?
Who cares?
So why do you? I have a theory myself, but why do you think when he was resurrected, he took the time to fold the grave clothes and?
Yeah, it was customary actually.
Okay.
In those days for a meal. It has to do with mealtime traditions, where if you were not finished with a meal, you would fold your napkin and lay it on the table, and it signified that you were coming back.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, okay.
That you were coming back. If you were done with your meal, you'd wad up your napkin and throw it on the floor.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of people think that the reason that his grave clothes were neatly folded and placed in place was that it was, I'm coming back.
Yeah.
I'm not done here.
Well, I like that one. I guess I've kind of taken the idea that that would be the last thing that you would worry about.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes time to put everything neat, decently in order on your way out.
Mm-hmm.
Means God's not pressed for time. God doesn't rush. And this was something he's just, everything is done orderly.
Yeah.
And he took the time to just fold everything up nice and okay, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Just God doesn't get pressured. He doesn't get excited. He just does what needs to be done.
Right.
So that's an interesting, I like that. I'll be back.
Yeah.
That was his I'll be back moment.
Well, and just the fact that the gospel authors included that.
Yeah.
If this is a made up story, it would be so insignificant to anything that who cares? But they wrote this. So anytime you're looking at faked historical documents about especially things like this, and as you look at the myths of Messiah type figures throughout the ages, they're lacking historically, and in the documents, they're lacking these kinds of specific historical evidences and events, dates and times and details. They're lacking these things. And so this has them. This has them. The story of the resurrection has them. Another thing is that Jesus appeared to many, many people after the resurrection. John 24 talks about it. Luke 24 says that in 1 Corinthians, Paul says that Paul, who was a convert, we're going to talk about him in a minute, says that Jesus appeared to over 500 people after the resurrection. He appeared to over 500 people. Now, there's a lot of people have said, no, his disciples, his followers were just in trauma, and this is like a mass hallucination. They said there's been documentation of this throughout the generations of things like this happening.
Right.
When people have experienced a traumatic event, they see this mass hallucination event. But as you look at the details of these records, of these accounts of these appearings of Jesus, they don't give the feeling of a mass hallucination event. And it's in varieties of ways, in different places, at different times, for saying different things. There have been people that actually have studied these specific appearings of Jesus mentioned in the Bible, and they go, no, this doesn't fit the description of a mass hallucination event. This is something different. These people actually believe that they saw Jesus. And the details show that they did see something. They did see something. To me, and I think we've mentioned this before on the podcast, but to me, possibly the greatest evidence for the fact that the resurrection happened is the fact that you start out with the disciples hiding because they're afraid of the Jews and the Romans. After the death of Jesus at the crucifixion, they are locked away for fear of the Jews. They're locked because they fear that the Jews are now going to come for them.
They're next.
Because they're going to eradicate them
Yeah.
because they got rid of Jesus. Now they're going to get rid of them. They are afraid for their lives. And that fear would not have changed. If they're so afraid after it happens, what would change if he didn't rise from the dead? What would change about them to say, now I'm going to stick my neck out literally to stand for the fact that I'm going to lie that Jesus rose from the dead. That does not make any sense.
No, it doesn't. You it's like if you're in a group, you punch the biggest one, and once you do that one, the rest of them scatter.
Yep.
And that's what the Pharisees did. They crucified Jesus. There's no reason. It doesn't make sense.
And they didn't, we'll leave you alone. Jesus is gone. Okay, we'll leave you alone.
Right.
The threat to their lives was not reduced if they stood firm in their faith.
Yeah.
So this idea that these guys would go from fearful, so afraid that they're trembling and they're locked in a room to literally giving their lives. And I have a list. We haven't done this yet on the podcast, so I thought we would do this. Yeah. So they became bold preachers.
Yeah.
Threatened with martyrdom, threatened with death and pain. Tradition says these are the way that these apostles died.
Yeah.
James, the son of Zebedee, so John's brother, the New Testament records that King Herod had him beheaded. So we don't have James going, you know what, King, we made this up. I'm good. Sorry, my bad.
Mass hallucination.
Yeah, no, I was lying. I'd like to keep my head. He didn't do that. Herod had him beheaded. Okay. Yeah. Tradition says that Peter was crucified upside down, possibly in Rome at his own request because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified the same way Jesus was.
Yeah.
Andrew, tradition says that he was crucified on an X-shaped cross in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
John, he wasn't martyred. They tried. They boiled him in oil, and he didn't die. And he actually lived out his days on a prisoner island.
I wish there was some account of that. Like, what must that have been like?
I know.
We're gonna boil you in oil for your belief. The fact that he didn't recant, but then now he's in there like, hot tub. I don't know.
Well, there are historical accounts of the Romans doing this.
Yeah.
And almost everybody died.
Yeah.
John didn't.
Yeah.
So again, John's facing the boiling oil doesn't say, we made this up. This is a lie. None of these guys did this.
Right.
James, the son of Alphaeus, says that he was beaten to death in Egypt. Bartholomew, now this is an interesting one. This is an interesting one. Bartholomew, tradition says that he was skinned alive and then beheaded. Yeah. So that level of excruciating pain, at no point do you say, I don't believe that this actually happened. Even to save your life, even to avoid the pain. They don't even lie.
That is an excellent point. They could have recanted because it was a lie.
Mm-hmm.
They could have recanted to save their life.
Mm-hmm.
But the resurrection was real, and the implications of that, I can't change my mind.
We can't pass this over without really highlighting this. Even they were so convinced that something infinitely important had taken place, that they were suffering these excruciating deaths. So let's say it this way. Even if they had seen Jesus rise, they could have avoided the pain by lying and saying that he didn't rise.
Right.
But they were so convinced that something eternal had entered into finite humanity.
Right.
Some great miracle had happened. They went through with this suffering and never said, I was lying.
They could have believed it and just kept it to themselves.
Right.
They could have worshiped in their home and just like, it's just you and me, God. But no, they said it's not only enough. I can't recant. I have to tell people.
Yeah.
That's
right. And people can look
for you
up,
skeptics, pay attention.
Right. And people can look up, there's artwork done on St. Bartholomew. Actually, he's in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel painting. He's the one that's holding skin.
Oh, no, I've noticed
with a
that.
face that's drooping. He's the one that's holding
I'll
skin.
have to take a second look at that.
The interesting part of that too is that the skin that he's holding isn't actually the face that he has that Michelangelo painted for Bartholomew. It's Michelangelo's self-portrait. So he's the skin that's dangling, kind of screwed up, but just an interesting fact. Tradition says Thomas was killed with a spear in India.
Yep.
Paul says that he was beheaded under Emperor Nero in Rome. Philip was crucified or impaled in Asia Minor. Simon the Zealot, tradition says he was martyred by being cut in half with a saw. Matthew was killed with a sword in Ethiopia. Thaddeus was crucified in Armenia. Mark was dragged to the streets until he died in Alexandria, Egypt.
Yeah.
Luke, tradition says he was hanged in Greece.
That is one I did not know about. I was aware of the apostles, but
yeah, and so Luke wasn't even an eyewitness to Jesus,
right?
But he was so convinced because of these other people that he was willing to go through with the death of a martyr.
I think that's one of the most amazing things when you look at people who have had an experience with Jesus and they're willing to lose everything. And then people watch them. That has to have an impact.
Right.
That has to, well, Stephen died. He was stoned to death. And what happened? Saul, before he became Paul, Saul was impacted.
Yeah.
He had to have been going down the road to Damascus saying, what a nut job.
Yeah.
How could you die for something that's not true?
Right.
And then, what if?
Yeah. What if?
And then all of a sudden,
he saw Jesus.
Well, I think, for me, the most amazing biblical proof is really that none of these men recanted, not even one.
Right.
There's no record, not even one. I mean, if one of them would have said, "Well, no, we made this up,"
Yep.
They didn't. But
any of the leaders in the day would have championed that. Oh, we got Mark to recant.
Right.
We got Luke to say it wasn't true. None of that. We have none of that.
That's right. I think for me, one of the things that I look at as proof of the resurrection is what I see today, where people change. How can someone who reads the Bible, how can someone who prays to God, how can someone who attends church regularly, when a person is, they're a drunkard or a druggie or whatever, to pick your poison, that they actually start to see change in their life.
Change life.
Or you try everything you can to be different and you can't. And all of a sudden you pray, you talk to God, and all of a sudden you see those changes begin to take place. Is proof to me that there's a risen Savior.
Yeah. And we have some evidence of that too. Can we bring up Mark 3:21? This one's really amazing. It's not one that's often discussed, but Mark 3:21.
Okay.
So it says, this is Jesus was teaching in a house and he was doing all these things, and his family didn't believe what he was doing. Even Mary is a little like, Jesus, maybe you shouldn't be doing all this stuff. But he had brothers. It's debated on whether they were Joseph's sons or Mary's sons. We're not going to get into that today. But look what this verse says. This is speaking of his family. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying he's out of his mind. So Mark, the brother of Jesus, James, I'm sorry, James, the brother of Jesus, did not believe in Jesus until after the resurrection. And James, the brother of Jesus, is the author of the book of James in the Bible.
Yeah.
So he did not believe. And why, if he didn't believe in Jesus, Jesus is crucified, why wouldn't he be like, see, you fool, look what you did?
Yeah.
Why all of a sudden does he believe in the resurrection and becomes a leader of the church and an author of one of the books of Scripture?
Yeah.
That's a changed life right there.
Yeah.
That makes no sense whatsoever at all. Yeah. So, and even if this is made up, why would they have put that verse in the Gospels that his family didn't believe?
Right.
To me, that becomes more unbelievable unless it's actually true.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That his family was a skeptic or a doubter, and now James, his brother, is a leader of the church because he saw Jesus
Right.
alive after he'd been killed.
I think this is when if you stop to consider all of these things, it's hard to deny. But for the skeptic out there, if you need proof of the resurrection, and I think it ties back to the last episode we did, but if you need proof of the resurrection, why don't you try talking to him yourself?
Yeah.
Try talking to Jesus yourself.
Right.
Pray. Talk a little bit about the prayer challenge that you're doing.
So we have a prayer challenge. It's called the Try Jesus Challenge. You can sign up for this on the website. It's about halfway down our homepage. And what we're just asking people to do is twice a day, commit to talking to God. Even people that have never talked to him before, just start talking to him. If you're mad at God, we want you to shout at God twice a day. If your heart is broken, cry. If you're rejoicing because good things are happening, talk to him and thank him, or just say, God, these good things are happening in my life. And we want to hear what, if anything, is happening as a result of what's going on in your life. You don't have to sign up on the website. Just email us, tryjesusauburn@gmail.com. Let us know that you're part of the prayer challenge. And we want to hear, is your perspective changing? Are things happening in your life that are unexpected? Are you struggling? Is there things that you need us to talk to God about for you? That's what the Try Jesus Challenge is all about.
Wow. Well, I think it's appropriate. I think it's a great time of year. I think that, if Jesus is real, if Jesus has resurrected, what are you're wasting an opportunity. You're wasting an amazing opportunity at an amazing experience and a relationship with God. Try it out.
Yeah.
Talk to him.
And if it's true, which all these people believe, and there's other reasons to believe that we don't have time to get into today, but if it's true, all God's promises are confirmed. That's Heaven's right. True. Jesus is coming again is true. There will be justice and peace and mercy in this world really soon. New heavens and the new earth. Judgment. And as you said, we can have a changed life. Our hearts can change.
Yeah.
Our habits can change. Our way of thinking can change. Our families can be saved and salvaged. Our children can have peace and hope beyond the craziness of this world. We don't have to go to Mars in order to save the human race like scientists think we have to do.
Yeah.
Put a civilization on Mars. All of these things, everything changes. And our eyes can shift on what's above this earth and not get stuck in the mud of what's happening all around us.
I know we're at the end of the podcast, and I want to give you an opportunity to say some words before we end. I just wanted to, you were talking there. I was reminded of something that I saw with Jordan Peterson about a year or two ago. Apparently, you know who Jordan Peterson is, right? He went through a health crisis that was, I guess, pretty significant. And he'd lost a lot of weight, and it was not a good situation. But he started talking about, during that time, he started thinking about God. And then he started talking about Jesus. And it was on a podcast with a Christian. And he said that there's no way that you can, in his mind, there's no way that you can deny that God exists. And the embodiment of God, he said, is in Jesus Christ. But he said, the problem is that I'm afraid to accept him because of what it would mean of everything I would have to change. And he was almost in tears. But that he said the embodiment of God is Jesus. But what does it mean? It's frightening for me to think what would happen if I actually made the decision to accept Jesus. And I've never heard anyone put it quite like that. But for the skeptic, this is the time of year where you may, be challenged. But what would it mean if Jesus is real and you deny him? But what would it mean if Jesus is real and you accept him? Anything you want to say before we end the episode?
I think you ended it up. A lot of people put Christianity in terms of what I'm going to lose if I believe. What do you have to stand to gain if you believe? Is it possible that all the things you think you're going to miss out on, fun and love and sexual pleasure and all this stuff, people are worried that they're going to miss out on? What if letting God redefine that because he's our creator? What if we actually get to experience it closer to what a perfect creation was all about? What if we really get to love like God created, the way God created love? What if we get to experience peace and joy and hope and nature and everything around us more like God intended us to experience it? A lot of people think of this as is I'm going to lose out. What if you gain everything?
Yeah.
What if you
Yeah.
gain a peace that passes all human understanding, that
Right.
comes straight from God? And ultimately, what if by saying, God, I've been living apart from you, I want to live closer to you. What if you gain an eternal relationship that will never die with a friend that loves you and died to save you? What if you gain that stuff? One that sees you and knows you and loves you, saw you on your worst day and still loves you and cares
Yeah.
for you and gave his life for you. What if you gain that relationship? Why would you wait another second?
Well, look, if you've been challenged, if you've been encouraged, I want to encourage you, go to the website and let Pastor Dustin know. Send an email, send a note, let him know. If you have questions about this episode, let him know. If especially for the skeptic, if you have a question, let him know. We'd
Yeah.
love to address it here. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. But on the note you just said, what if?
Mhm.
What if it's real? We'll leave that and we'll see you next time.